Is the Premier League better now because literally 3, 4, 5 weekends in, we're saying, oh my God, this matters so much because the bar City have set means that you can't afford to go 8, 9 points behind?
My Christmas day always has been and always will be. We don't do presents until after lunch, right? And everybody would say, oh, that's rubbish, because you get the immediate excitement, enjoyment on the opening morning of Christmas, and you get all of your presents there and then.
That was fair enough, wasn't it? Any club's fan base would do the same.
But don't you want to win?
Hello and welcome along to Not Another Sports Pod, episode 12, with myself, David, and Mr. Ollie Wilson. And I know most of our listeners are very much audio only, Ollie, but it might be worth a few people just clicking on the Not Another Sports Pod's work in progress YouTube page just to get the nice panoramic that I got, the big blue sky and the green foliage. And Wilson with his plant in the corner is not too far behind, by the way. Look over that right shoulder, Wilson. You got some great foliage.
Hey, it's the same sunshine that's shining down on both of us right now, whether it's the start of moving into spring for you out in South America, or whether it's me, the end of summer and the start of the autumnal period. But it's the same sunshine nevertheless. We could be next door to each other for all anybody knows right now.
I've heard it's a bit of an Indian summer in the UK as well, right? It's looking nice.
We'll see. I mean,
okay.
I don't know if it'll end up being like that, but it's nice for this week at least. 20 degrees or so. So always good when you're working outdoors on the weekend, as I was, which is very useful for that.
Beautiful. Ollie, the Premier League title race, it's probably a good place to start this pod and many a pod, to be honest. Arsenal winning the North London derby, keeping the gap to City to within 2 points. I guess the big preview, really, and the big takeaway from that is that Arsenal almost managed to cling on to their status in the title race, because I do think if they'd have dropped points against Tottenham, it would have been a real uphill struggle. Manchester City against Arsenal next Sunday, Ollie. 2-point difference. I'm not going to say Arsenal have to win, because they don't. A draw would keep it at 2 points in then a 33-game season still alive. But is it mustn't lose? As in, if City win, it's a 5-point difference, but it's not. It's really 6 points because of the goal difference. Man City with a 6-point lead in a 33-game season. Who's backing Arsenal to win that? Nobody, right? So, I don't know. Next Sunday, mustn't lose? Must win?
Well, every single one of these times that you have two sides that are potentially going to battle it out for the title, whatever time this game comes, the 6 points between those teams is massively important anyway. So you could argue, and a case could certainly be made for the idea that if Arsenal lose, that's a massive drop in the title race already. Because if this game was turning up going into Christmas and their second meeting was right at the end of the season, say, you would be saying that sort of thing. It just so happens that we're 4 weeks, 5 weeks into a brand new season. So a 6-pointer battle at the top of the table, wherever it comes, is always worth 6 points. The difference is that if you stumble, there is time to recover. It's whether you believe, as we've touched on this time and time again, whether you believe that City have that ability to stumble, and whether you think they will show that level of fallibility where they won't potentially reach 91 points in a season. They may underdo it. They may hit 87, 86 and keep that door slightly ajar for somebody else. I mean, are you looking at... I don't think we believe, either of us, that Newcastle have got title credentials in their ranks and the ability to maintain a 2-point gap on Manchester City. But for instance, Liverpool losing this weekend against Forest, not many people would have said Liverpool nailed on to be in a title race, but certainly a chance considering the way they've started with Arne Slot until this weekend. Now, would you say, okay, that's their title race done and dusted at this point? Okay, so
it's a 2-team title race. It was before the season. It is now, and it will be in a few weeks, I think. I've got a question for you, Ollie, actually. Is the Premier League better now because City have raised this incredible bar and perfection can never be boring? Is the Premier League better now because literally 3, 4, 5 weekends in, we're saying, oh my God, this matters so much because the bar City have set means that you can't afford to go 8, 9 points behind. Whereas, we probably started picking up football really in like the 90s, like probably properly following it like mid-late 90s, right? Early noughties. And the title race is there for any of our younger listeners. If you were like 6, 7, 8 points behind, even at Christmas, people still felt like it was on, didn't they? Like I remember Premier League title races with Arsenal, Man United. There's the famous one where Man United come back from 12 points behind in the league season against Newcastle. This all felt very on. It felt very possible. Whereas now, if you said City were 9 points clear in December, Boxing Day, it's done and dusted. It's over. Do you think the Premier League is therefore better as a result because the jeopardy comes in earlier, or is it worse as a result because we don't have that possibility of a comeback and it can be over earlier?
This might be the most leading question to an obvious answer that you've ever given on this podcast.
No, it's not, mate.
Well, no, because it's not.
I don't know what your answer is.
Well, firstly, it's not better if you're talking about a title race potentially being over after 5 weeks in a season. It just isn't. It's boring.
Yeah, but it means. But Ollie, that means that it matters more earlier. So like this Man City Arsenal game on what will be the 5th weekend of the Premier League season. It's like this is not a title decider, but I mean it matters more than if this was being played in 2002 when it's like, oh well, you know what? Even if Arsenal lose, it's only 5 points and they can get that back. Do you not think there's an element to that? It's more exciting earlier.
No, it's not, because if you have all the excitement, okay, I'm going to put this down to you on the only way I know how to, the only example I can do of waiting out the experience, right? My Christmas day always has been and always will be. We don't do presents until after lunch, right? And everybody would say, oh, that's rubbish, because you get the immediate excitement, enjoyment on the opening morning of Christmas, and you get all of your presents there and then. But I know a lot of people would get to the afternoon after dinner on Christmas Day and be like, well, there's nothing really to look forward to now. Like we've had all that excitement straight off the bat. It was awesome, but now I've had that rush and it's not really there anymore. Whereas we've always done it, as I say, main presents after Christmas Day lunch, which could be 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Everything's got to be tidied away already. But you know what that gave us as kids? Oh, that weighted expectation. You're looking at those Christmas presents under the tree going, that's what I want. I want to get my hands on that. I've got to wait for it, but I can't wait to get my hands on that. And that's what a league title ideally will come down to. It's a build-up and a build-up and a build-up to the crunch moments towards the end of the season where, look, that's why it's called the business end of the season, because you want all the business to be done then. The only business you want done early is in a transfer window in football. Everything else, when it comes down to the league standings and the head-to-head matchups, you want it coming down to the business end of the season, the last 7-8 weeks of a campaign, and then there's more onus on the game, there's more impetus on the result, and there's so much more potential build-up to get excited for. If Arsenal play City, I can't remember when they meet later on in the season, but if it's towards the end of the season and there's nothing riding on it, well, it's not. It's just another game. And if the title race is over by the time we get to Christmas, which it could potentially be, I'm not saying it's over now. I still have faith that we can have some entertainment in this season. But if it's over potentially by Christmas and City have got a 7-8 point lead over everybody else, it just makes the second half of the season redundant to me. Why am I excited about, okay, I guess we're going to be watching the battle for the Europa League spots or who makes the Champions League? Cool. It's not interesting. It's what every single person slammed Italian football for what's happening in the Premier League right now, which is one team destroying it, and somebody has to be perfect. There was a season where Roma started out of the gates flying, and I think they were unbeaten in something like their first 15 or 16 games of the year, and were staying neck and neck with Juventus. And then they just dropped off because it was so difficult to stay as consistent as Juventus were. And Serie A was worse for it, because you were just looking at a race for Champions League and Europa League spots. And it means a lot to those clubs, but it doesn't mean much to the grand overall outcome of a league title. And you want to see championships decided, not fourth places decided. Otherwise, Arsenal fans would have been elated with what Wenger was doing year on and year on out and wouldn't have had cause to complain.
All right, so Christmas reference from Ollie Wilson on the 16th of September. He's got the decorations up now. He's a settled family man. Christmas tree up.
You got what I was saying with it, though. You got exactly what I was saying. Yeah,
very nice, and it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue with that. Just a few other things in the Premier League. I mean, Erling Haaland. I hate that phrase. What is there left to say? But I mean, 9 goals in 4 games. I mean, he came so close, Ollie, to a third successive hat trick. He would have been the first player to do it since someone did it in 1946. He hit the post when he was on a brace. I don't know what. He's just ridiculous. He's just stupid. Just what is it? Every single record, if he stays at City, he's going to be smashed.
Isn't it ruined a bit? Isn't it just ruined a little bit by the fact that it's happening at a Manchester City side that have everything hanging over their heads? And I know we'll touch on that in a moment or two. But
let's talk about that.
It taints everything at the moment. It really just puts a dark cloud over all of it. And as I've said previously, we should be looking at Erling Haaland. And Erling Haaland should be put on that pedestal already, like the greats of the Premier League. But for me, there's something so untrue about what he's doing in comparison to the likes of a Shearer and Henry. I never really liked Newcastle or Arsenal, so it takes a lot for me to say that about those two, for instance. Or, a Cantona and what the flavour he brought to the Premier League. I mean, a Rooney...
Already scored more goals than Cantona, I think.
I know, and it's...
Isn't that just bonkers?
I cannot look at him in
bonkers.
I still think Cantona's just that... And maybe it's obviously growing up as well, and a childhood, you look at your idols more and everything. But there is just that dark stain of negativity of these charges hanging over Manchester City that just makes you go, yeah, but if you cheated, it doesn't really matter. It just doesn't.
Well, okay, let's talk about the charges. I mean, the first thing, Ollie, is you are, as an individual, as an organisation, as a company, according to the British judicial system, you are innocent until proven guilty, right? Everyone agrees on that. It's like very much... It is one of the things that actually this country is like super proud of. Our justice system and our legal system form the basis of many legal systems around the world, and that's just a really strong premise, right? You're innocent until proven guilty. But there's 115 charges. I think my main issue with this whole thing, Ollie, is that the investigation opened 6 years ago. It started 6 years ago, and City have won 5 of the last 6 Premier League titles since then. So, like, I just don't understand how it's taken this long. Like, this has been going on and on and on. The trial has now started, but I mean, like, do people think it's going to last a day, a week, a month, 6 months? And then when the verdict finally comes, what, you think City aren't going to appeal? Like, that's another 3 months, 6 months, year. Like, so it's not like this is going to be sorted. I don't think it gets sorted this season. I really don't, because I think maybe there'll be an initial judgment, but it'll be like pending, pending an appeal, etc., etc. I just think this is kind of maybe a bit of a simplistic and childish way to go about this, but let's just predict what's going to happen here, Ollie. And I think that this is like the O.J. Simpson of the Premier League era in terms of legal cases. And I just think the City's lawyers, if you look at the whole structure of Manchester City, look at Pep Guardiola, possibly the best coach in the world. I know you have your issues with him, but obviously a top coach, top squad, everything they've done, massive success. Obviously their lawyers are going to be the best. Like, they're going to be better than the FA's lawyers. They're going to be paid more. They're going to be better. And I just think it's a glove doesn't fit moment. And I reckon that City's lawyers produce a 35-yard outside of the right boot screamer, and City escape with like a 3-point deduction or some kind of suspended sentence. I think City's lawyers are just gonna do the business, and I reckon City emerge from this pretty unscathed.
I would almost rather that happened than what I think might end up happening, which is that kind of too big to fail. If City get found guilty on 110 of 115 charges or whatever, if they're found guilty of breaching the financial fair play regulations, it puts an asterisk next to those titles, doesn't it? I mean, it must do. If they're found guilty in the court of law. And if that happens, that's such a tarnish on the Premier League. Do you remember when the Italian football scandal broke with the referees being put in changing rooms at half-time and the match-fixing scandal that saw Juventus sent down to Serie B? This is that, but on one single club's level, and the most dominant club that we are seeing right now in the last 7-8 years of Premier League football, which is a long period of time. And if they are found guilty, there have to be huge repercussions on that club. And I don't think there is anybody who will have the guts to do that because of the killing of the reputation it will give to both the Premier League, English football, and Manchester City, and everybody around that as well. You know, I don't want to paint Pep Guardiola as the mafia don who's in control of all of this, because I don't necessarily think he is at all or anything like that. But even his status as a manager comes with a big tarnish on his record as well for being involved in this, for, you know, pushing for this amount of money to be spent maybe in the transfer window, and for the success that he's had off the back of it. It rips it all away, the success he's had at Manchester City. It doesn't change anything to do with Barcelona and Bayern Munich, but it certainly brings into question everything he's done at this club.
Also, like, Ollie, you got to believe that Arsenal's lawyers, Liverpool's lawyers, Man United's lawyers, anyone that lost the cup final against City the last few years, like, do you not think those clubs are thinking, okay, well, if City gets charged of this, then maybe we've got a legal case here. I mean, clubs are financially well backed. They're also petty. Like, clubs are super fucking petty. So, like, you got to believe that if City get found guilty of certain things, any club that finished second in a league season to City or lost a cup final to City is going to be having a little look and getting some very, very good legal advice as to their next step. So it could be an absolute unraveling of it could be a mess.
There's an interesting sporting precedent that could take place reasonably soon from the world of Formula One about this, because Felipe Massa lost a world title to Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton's first that he won on the final corner of the final race of the season. So much so that Massa had won the Brazilian Grand Prix, or maybe he was second in that race, but had done enough that the Ferrari garage is celebrating, thinking that he's won the Drivers' Championship. And Hamilton overtakes Timo Glock on the final corner, crosses the line, there's confusion, and it turns out Hamilton has won the title. But that year in Singapore, there was a huge incident in Formula One where a car intentionally crashed to cause a safety car under team orders, which then led to the resulting driver of the team having the opportunity to win the Grand Prix, which the safety car, because of the intentional crash, actually knocked Massa out of contention when it came to his point scoring in that race. So Felipe Massa's lawyers have said in the last 12 months, because of this intentional crash that was deemed illegal by Formula One and repercussions and sanctions were handed out to those in the Benetton team around that, well, that crash cost Felipe Massa the title because of the points he lost in Singapore and the points he would have then had in his back pocket going into that last race in Brazil, which means that whatever the result Hamilton had in that race, he wouldn't have been able to beat Felipe Massa. And that is a legal battle that I think is still being currently fought at this point for loss of earnings as a Formula One world champion, the potential sponsorship values after that, etc. So it would be very interesting to see the outcome of that and whether there's an out-of-court settlement, to then see the reaction of, say, clubs like Liverpool, Manchester United, etc., for feeling that they've been done a disservice by having to compete with a Manchester City side that hasn't obviously lived up to the regulations.
Just wrapping up on the Premier League, Ollie. I saw a quote from Ange Postecoglou. He was obviously a bit on the back foot. Spurs, they've actually played quite well this season so far, created loads of chances, but 4 points from 4 games isn't very good. And he was he can be a bit spiky, can't he? And he said, I always win things in my second year. And I just thought that was quite a bold quote in an era where you're probably better to kind of under-promise and over-deliver, to say, I always win things in my second year for a Tottenham side that haven't historically won much recently. I don't know. I quite liked it in some ways, but I think by saying that, you kind of got to go out and win something now. If you say I always win something in my second year, I thought it was an interesting quote from him.
I mean, it's true. So fair enough. You can back it up for sure. It's a sign of intent, which I think is always a good thing. Sign of positivity coming from a manager. The interview post the North London derby discussing that comment was a bit of a weird one, because he obviously seemed to not enjoy the conversation and the way the questions were phrased and put towards him by the Sky reporter, who actually, Emma's a very good journalist and very good at her job. But I think Ange was a bit prickly about that, which then didn't exactly make it feel like it was coming off in a great light as that interview went on, neither his answers nor the way the interview was shaping up, which never works out well if you're trying to phrase something positive, but it's got a spiky edge to it. So I don't really mind. I think the difference is Ange Postecoglou needs to realise he's at Tottenham, because there is just a bad mentality in that stadium, in that fan base, and in that team that, and I don't mean from the players, I mean from the dressing room up, the management, the backroom staff, etc.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, there's just this idea at Tottenham of there's a constant bubble of not being able to get it done in the big moments, which you can even go back to that Leicester City fantastic season when Tottenham should have won the title that year, and they didn't. They threw away their chances like everybody else did, but they were the ones at least that were in the run and gun to be able to push Leicester for the title. It never happened, and thankfully it didn't, because we got the greatest Premier League title story that we will ever have, unless City gets stripped of all of theirs, and then that's probably one of the best title stories ever. But Tottenham have always had this on-running theme of being the lesser club to Arsenal in terms of success, a club that isn't able to push anything over the line. You look at the Champions League final.
Got the stadium, don't they?
The stadium's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the best venues in the country, without a doubt. But you can build a wonderful theatre if the play never reaches its final performance, there's no point, is there? So
Tony Wilson in his analogy era. I love it. Now that he's drunk on the success of the Christmas analogies, he's wandering into the thespian.
it's only because I'm trying to join the stage society down at a golf club in London, so I'm getting into my getting the thespian shoes on. No, and
no,
I just
take your point, like the Spursy thing, Ollie, right? Like,
yeah,
and that's hard to shake whether how accurate it is, whether that's just a case of you didn't have good enough players, rather than something like in the DNA of the football club. I don't know, not close enough to Spurs to know. But it's not a great tag to have, is it? It's one you want to get rid of.
And I think it's one that's very difficult to get rid of when you have scenes like happened at the end of last year with the Tottenham fan base being happy to see Tottenham give up a points to Manchester City to prevent Arsenal from bringing the title race.
That was fair enough, wasn't it? Any club's fan base would do the same.
Don't you want to win? If
why
player,
was it relevant? Like
if the player fan relation, because you're a winner. If you want to win in sports, you have to be a stone cold, ruthless, killing, winning machine. That's what you want to do to succeed. That's what you want to do to get to the top. That's why Erling Haaland is the guy, because he is willing to take that shot when other people wouldn't and would think about squaring it. He doesn't think about it. He just does it, and he's a clinical centre forward because of that. It's all done on instinct. He's a proven winner and goal scorer. That's why Pep Guardiola, he is just a winner, and people will follow him and are willing to buy into it because he's a winner. That's why Michael Jordan was hated, yet everybody loves a winner, and everybody liked the outcome of what happens with the Chicago Bulls because it's all about winning at the end of the day. And you need to have that attitude rather than being a kind of, oh, well,
how can Spurs shut people up? Win a trophy? Like if they won the FA Cup, is that like two fingers? Like that wasn't very Spursy, was it? Like, I mean, does that shut people up?
Yeah, I think a League Cup or an FA Cup certainly does that. The League Cup doesn't paper over the cracks enough, but getting silverware is getting silverware.
100%.
So if you go out and do that,
club,
and they've got the ability to.
Yeah, got the squad. I mentioned this on the pod the other day. Apart from Man City, for every other club in the Premier League, every other club that's aspiring to win things, top four in a trophy is a fantastic season. Like that is a fantastic, or even a trophy. Is a great season really. Ollie, I know the international break's been and gone, but we are in that international break kind of era with 1 October, 1 November. Lee Carsley, England manager, can you see it?
I mean, I don't mind it at this point. I love the fact that he brought in a load of youngsters, untried and untested, for the international break, because you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because they created the Nations League to reduce the number of international friendlies. But now if we're going to complain that we're not putting out a strong enough side for the Nations League, how are we ever going to get these guys opportunities when there's only a handful of friendlies a year and in a kind of World Cup cycle to get them involved in? So you might as well get them involved in the Nations League, which doesn't mean that much to England fans and international football than anything else. I thought the whole Sing-gate was just ridiculous. I couldn't care less whether somebody stands and sings the national anthem or not, whether they've played for Ireland, whether they are English, whether it's a combination of the two. We never got irked by the fact that Capello wasn't happy to stand there and sing the national anthem or anything like that. So when it comes to those sorts of absolute codswallop stories, I just couldn't care, and that's what puts off really good managers from even being involved in the England job. Like, why, if you're Jurgen Klopp, would you stand there and accept somebody from the Mirror or somewhere going, "Oh, well, he didn't sing the English national anthem"? Like, it's just yeah.
Also, some people just don't want to sing on camera. Do you know what I mean? Not everyone's like a karaoke guy. Like, so some people just don't want to sing on camera, which I totally get. Apparently, he never sung the Irish national anthem when he.
And you don't get. You do get some players that don't sing the anthem as well. You know, there'll be a couple that are belting it out, great gusto. Like, I think Tony Adams and Stuart Pearce probably sang the loudest in Euro 96 when we were kind of growing up. But there were also guys like that would either mouth it. Darren Anderton never looked like he sang it, just kind of get through it.
Well, he didn't want to injure his jawbone, did he, Darren Anderton?
Wow, you're taking shots at Darren Anderton about 20 years later.
Didn't expect to be taking cheap shots at Darren Sicknote Anderton. That was back in the day where you could sort of, I don't know. All right, Ollie. I want to talk about Joshua Fury just momentarily. Kind of a fair weather boxing fan, like most people are. This caught my eye because Eddie Hearn said that Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury must happen. That fight must take place by the end of next year, or it will never happen. Now, from the outside looking in the boxing world, is this one of the greatest flaws of boxing? Like, whatever you want to say about football, the best teams face the best teams, like they do in the Champions League. The best teams face the best teams. Tennis, the best teams face the best players face the best players. You know, golf, F1. Like the best face the best. It's built into the fabric of the structure of the sporting calendar for that sport. Is this a big Is this a big problem with boxing from the punter's point of view? Like, how has this not happened? How has Joshua and Fury in a packed Wembley not happened? And even if it happens now, it's kind of like you miss that magic window. Like, it would still fill out Wembley, 3 times over. Of course it would. It'd still be massive. But is that one of the biggest flaws, something that the sport really needs to address?
Without a doubt. I mean, you've got all these boxing organizations, the WBA, the IBF, the WBO, etc., the WBC, and it's just they all have their own contender that they want to see getting involved in. I mean, we've got Joshua against Dubois coming up this weekend, and considering we've had Fury and Joshua circling each other for about 4 years now, maybe 5
at least,
certainly since the Deontay Wilder first fight between Fury and they obviously had to have the rematch. And then ever since that, it's like, cool, let's get AJ against Fury. Let's put it in Wembley. Let's have the biggest boxing fight in British history back in Wembley rather than sending it off to Saudi Arabia. And it's like, well, that's never going to happen because deals have been done so that these fights are now going to be in Saudi and they're not going to be in the UK, which you kill the atmosphere, I think, from a personal perspective. Then you have, as I say, all these contenders who are meant to be the contender for the IBF belt or the WBO belt, etc. So we want our contender getting the next shot at whichever belt they're lined up for. So you have to please all of these boxing bodies and then all the promoters and all the TV companies as well, because you've got DAZN, Sky, Discovery, TNT, all have their promoters who have got deals with them, but then they all have to... Because I think the Joshua fight is on DAZN and on TNT and on Sky, I think. 3 pay-per-views for one fight is a really interesting place that we've got into with boxing, because it surely can't be beneficial for the TV companies to have 3 different TV networks showing it and splitting the cash 3 ways, basically, from the punters that are willing to pay for it. So it's all so convoluted now. And we get denied the fight that arguably could have been a classic if Joshua was at his best and Fury was at his best, depending on which way you see it would go. I personally think Fury would win it. But they'll end up circling each other until it almost becomes irrelevant. And maybe it's a big payday once the belts are gone. And then it's just a kind of latter part of the career sort of fight that we get subjected to. And we don't see either of them at their best. And that's the trouble with boxing, is that some guys stick around too long just to keep picking up those big paychecks. And yeah, it's a huge downfall for the sport because it removes the interest. If the fight that's meant to happen never happens, what's the point in hoping that these big fights will take place?
Huge shame, isn't it? Especially for like boxing fans like me. There's like more and I probably represent loads of people, right? Like, I watch the big fights, but I'm not gonna I'm not super deep into the sport. And that is that, a Fury Joshua at Wembley. I don't know. Like, it would have just absolutely, a few years ago, it would have really captured the imagination, transcended the sport. Everyone would have watched it. It's a shame, man. Like, it's a shame. That's not what sport should be about. Like, keeping the best apart. And I don't know. It's a shame.
Can I ask you, as somebody that is, I'm not massively into my boxing religiously, but I've covered it, I've worked on it, I try and keep an interest. How much do you know about Daniel Dubois?
Yeah, almost nothing.
Yeah. There's going to be so many punters up and down the country that have that exact same thought of like, Daniel Dubois, I guess it's a name I've maybe heard of from some other fight cards that have either been on a Saturday night or on a rare pay-per-view event or something like that. But is this the guy that I'm itching to see? No, I'll watch a Joshua fight because I like Anthony Joshua and he's been around forever and I know about him and he's obviously built that legacy with the epic Klitschko fight. But nothing's ever really lived up to the greatness of that evening and the importance of it, of course, with Joshua defeating Klitschko in that manner. And it was just an incredible night of sport, let alone of boxing. Daniel Dubois isn't going to bring that same level of intensity, even if it is a great bout. It's just another fight. And all the pantomime around boxing as well, the sat at a table, war of words, one of them stands up, the other one stands up, all that kind of stuff. I mean, some fights go one way with like an absolute horrible level of disrespect before the fight, and then they're all shaking hands afterwards, and that's frustrating. I'd like to see 2 fighters just be like, look, I'm the best, you're the best. let's just have a fight and see who's the best boxer. With no idle chit chat, no like, oh well, I'm gonna put you in the ground with your family. Don't you talk about my family, like all that kind of stuff. Like leave that
Who
out of
was it
it.
that said? Who was it that said I'm going to eat your children? How was it? I can't remember. It was one like. I mean, this is one of a million explicit and horrible things that have been said in
Well, I know
to
there was
sell
something
fights.
that
I'll
was
look it
it
up.
Klitschko got frustrated about Fury because he said something about family, and he was like, "No, I actually don't think that's great at all. Like, you disrespected my family, you brought it into this. Like, well done for being in the fight, and I'll respect you as a fighter, but as a person, I don't respect you." And it's like, yeah, it's just not the edge that you want. These guys don't need to hate each other to enjoy the fight. This isn't WWF where we need a pantomime storyline around it. We just want to see the best fighters fighting each other. And if we don't get that, they try and sell it on the pantomime, which is a shame.
Yeah. No, I think it was Tyson that said I'm going to eat your children. I think in the
Oh, that
UFC
was
there
it.
was also
Yeah.
I'm going to change your face, which is a fucking crazy dark thing to say, isn't it? Like in I think it was in the UFC or something. But like I get it, they got to sell the fight. But the fact that Fury and Tyson haven't faced each other, yeah, it's a real stain on the sport, I think. I almost didn't like. I disliked how I phrased this to you on WhatsApp, Ollie, because it's so lazy of me. But I just put we have like a brief running order for the show, and I put Rory McIlroy bottler question mark or whatever, and it's like it's such a lazy adjective that we're all guilty of because it's just like an easy thing to say when someone doesn't do the thing that they should do or whatever. It basically when someone calls someone a bottler, it's basically saying you can't be bothered or don't have the knowledge to analytically like dissect why they didn't do it right. So you're just like bottler. But is Rory McIlroy a bottler now?
Well, we were happy
Like
to
he's
call Tottenham bottlers basically 10 minutes ago. So if we're going to use it, we can probably use it to describe Rory McIlroy as well at this point because look, the Irish Open this weekend kind of threw it away really on the Sunday, although Hoygaard had a wonderful Sunday of golf as well. I mean, it's tough to beat a guy who's in that sort of form going into a Sunday. And the trouble for Rory McIlroy is that he does everything so well, so consistently. It's just that somebody will do something so impressive at some point in a weekend that it will pip him to the post. Or you have incidents like we had obviously earlier in the year in Dubai when Rory on the 18th sent his ball flying into the water, or at Pinehurst in the US Open when Rory decided to take the driver out rather than playing it safe and just knocking it down the fairway and getting on the green and got himself in trouble and missed two big putts as well from inside 6 foot. So there is a problem with Rory McIlroy in these big events and the events that mean a lot to him in the crunch moments. But it's only highlighted more by the fact that he is so good so often. And he's right there in terms of being potentially one of the great. I mean, he is one of the greatest golfers of all time. But the fact it's 10 years now since a last major victory is a big shining light of somebody that is so good and yet just can't finish it off. And that, to me, is the definition of a bottler. Is it not?
but yeah, that's I think that's really fair. I thought his quotes are very stoic as well when he said, "I'm getting used to this, unfortunately." He said, "Hopefully the tide's going to turn pretty soon. I can turn all these close calls into victories." I mean, it's worth saying, it's worth noting as well, Ollie, that someone of that financial stature and place in the sport, I mean, he'll have access to the best of the best in sports psychology and all this kind of stuff, and he would have tried different things, and he's probably tried to not care as much, like at the real peak times, and all these different techniques, I'm sure. But yeah,
I think
I think that probably is the definition of a bottler.
I think he's tried everything. He's tried the all right, I'll play it safe, and then it's not come up enough. You think about the 150th Open at St Andrews when he was trying to hunt down Cam Smith, and Cam Smith's short game was just exceptional at the home of golf. And Rory didn't play safe, but he just couldn't finish a big putt, 3 or 4 on that final day, and he just couldn't get them to go, which is like the most agonizing thing for a golfer at any level, let alone at that level at that moment. But then he's also tried the right, sod it, I'm just going to be aggressive the whole time. And that's what we saw at the US Open this year. And that didn't work either. And there's almost like, well, you keep trying things, which one, that doesn't work. Okay, well, I'll try the other thing, that doesn't work. And it's almost like you're trying too many different things now to work out what it is. And what it is just having that clutchness, which you can talk about any sport. Sergio Aguero's finish against QPR was clutch at the end of the day. He takes that extra touch that just gives him the extra opportunity to smash that home and win City the title. The ability of someone like Lionel Messi or David Beckham's free kick against Greece to come up in the big moments. What Michael Jordan made his complete reputation of just being the guy that will finish out games when the pressure was on. Same with Wayne Gretzky, same with LeBron James. All the greatest are clutch. And someone like Scotty Scheffler in golf is clutch almost without having to be, because when he's won, he can win at a canter. He can win it Friday, Saturday, that Sunday's relatively easy for him. Or Tiger Woods came up with big moments. Everyone thinks about that chip in the Masters where it just comes straight across and he lets the break of the green just trickle it in and it stops on the edge of the hole, shows off the Nike ball, and then goes in almost like it was an AI done advert. But that was real life and that's what happened. And those big moments, and Rory will have one eventually. He will get that back. He will have that moment when he's on like a par 3 17th somewhere and he knocks it within 2 foot for a tap-in birdie to give himself a 2-shot cushion on the final day of a major. The frustrating thing is he's so close to providing it and it's still not coming. And it must be mental torture for him. You know, we get frustrated by stuff in our industry. But to be
Everyone
that,
does, man, in life if they feel like they messed up big moments, like, completely.
and golf's so isolating. You can't blame your clubs, you can't blame the ball, you can't blame anybody else around you. You're the only one swinging it, and it's all on your own shoulders.
Crazy. All right. Any other business? I just wanted to, just while you have a think about any other business you might want to tap into, maybe a bit of F1. I just want to. I was in Rosario this weekend, Ollie, which we chatted about very briefly, and you wonder how this links into not another sports world. Well, it is the birthplace of Messi, and I just like, man, it's just a crazy kind of nondescript, kind of almost charming little Argentine third tier city, like 3.5 hours outside Buenos Aires. And when you walk around, you're like, one of the biggest geniuses in the history of sport, and there will ever be, came from this like crumbling, shabby chic, odd little Argentine city. I don't know. And then there's this huge mural of him. And of course, there's loads in Buenos Aires. But like, there's this, mate, it's so vast on the side of this building. I don't know. It just hit home, man. Like, it's just like, wow, like sporting legends come from such odd places. And it's just kind of beautiful. And yeah, lots of Messi references around the lovely city.
I was going to say, did you do a count of how many?
No, it's more like there weren't. I wouldn't say they're like littered on every corner. It's more like the ones that were really well done. And one of them's on this huge block of flats. And yeah, I don't know. Like, he's kind of like Messi, just like looking down on the whole city from this massive apartment block. I don't know how they did it. Must have taken some serious manpower. But yeah, it was nice to pay a little pilgrimage to Mr. Messi.
Isn't that nice? I mean, it's a really neat thing to think about, that greatness can come from anywhere, as you say. And look, you don't have to be from a major city. You don't have to come from a big area or anything like that. But if there's drive and there's talent, then so much else comes into the equation. I mean, you think about all of these guys in things like US sports, where they're from middle of nowhere in Texas, and what they're able to then do to give back to their communities that perhaps haven't had it so lucky. Athletes from all around the world that do that. And that's what makes sports so great, is that you can achieve so much from so little, as long as you find a way to persevere and be gifted at the sport that you've got, whether it's, sounds cliche, but kicking a ball around the street somewhere, but learning those sorts of skills. And football's one of those great ones where you can come from anywhere, because you can pretty much play football anywhere on the planet. Maybe not Pyongyang in North Korea. I don't know if you're allowed to kick a ball around in the streets or not around there. I'm not sure.
There'll be some highly organised football matches there, I would have thought. But it also got me thinking about how, like, that's why I guess people say like kids should try out loads of sports and try your hand at anything, because think about like there will be out there obviously a million examples of this, but like some kid in like rural Paraguay, if you're just giving him a snooker cue when he was like 5, he would have been like the greatest snooker player of all time, right? But didn't have access to those opportunities. That's why football's a great leveler, Ollie, because there's no, like, you don't need any money really to start playing football and it's just accessible to everyone. So some sports like discriminate a little bit. Like golf maybe is one of those. Like there'll be like in South Sudan, there'll be someone who like just genetically could have been an incredible golfer, but because no one stuck a golf club in his hand when he was or her hand when she was 5, 6, 7, it never happened. So yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting to know the paths that haven't been taken as well.
The next Yusuf Dikic is just a few minutes away somewhere. One argument with the missus, and suddenly you're winning silver in the Olympics.
Exactly.
And I love that people are still doing that celebration as well. I've seen it in a number of places, and I think it's one of the best around because it's so simple.
It will stand the test of time. I think that one.
100%. It's the archer that people do quite often as well. It's that. I think it's a newer version of that, basically, just the stand, and it's great. Yeah, I mean, if you want to touch on F1, it's just one of the best races of the year. Very quickly in Baku, absolutely phenomenal. McLaren's Oscar Piastri wins it. Lando Norris had a shocker on Saturday in qualifying, gets knocked out in 17th, starts from right at the back of the grid, and then due to a huge balls up between Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez on the penultimate lap, and they're riding in third and fourth at that point. They collide into the barriers, and it allows George Russell to go third. Norris, after a great drive, ends up finishing fourth ahead of Max Verstappen. McLaren now lead the Constructors' Championship. And everybody's still just looking at next season. And this chap, Adrian Newey, who's left Red Bull, was the architect of Red Bull's genius car of the last few years. And he's gone to Aston Martin after all the palaver around his departure from Red Bull Racing and everything that took place with Christian Horner. And there's so much of the F1 world that's looking to the 8 months' time, and yet so much still to be decided because Ferrari are coming good right now, McLaren are coming good right now, and Red Bull is slowing down. And there is a real chance that Lando Norris does catch Max Verstappen in the title race and ends up becoming world champion this year, which you just would not have predicted after the first 8 races of the season.
It's a nice out, I think, Ollie.
Well, I did want to ask you one more thing.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything worse to watch than a sportsman complaining?
What about life in general?
I don't mean complaining about like an unfair call, but moaning about circumstances. Like when you have a tennis player who keeps on moaning about, oh, it's not fair, you're doing me a disservice. In the same way this weekend, Max Verstappen on the team radio was just, oh, the car's rubbish, it's not working anymore, it's not.
But isn't that just life advice for everyone, Ollie? Isn't that like, oh, my coffee's too cold, there's crap on the sidewalk, oh, it's a bit cloudy up there? Like, isn't that just how people like go through their lives? And I'm as guilty as anyone. Like the temptation to sort of clamp onto the negative, even when you're pottering around, like the internal, without getting too American about this, like you've got to be so careful about your kind of internal talk. Otherwise, you'll literally be walking down the street just picking negatives at everything you see. Isn't that just life?
Yeah, I mean that is how I live my life. I need to operate on the 5-to-1 ratio, which is you give yourself 5 compliments for every 1 negative you think about yourself. And when you start trying to do that on a daily basis, I'd love to see you try and do that, because that is tough. If you like internally chastise yourself once, you have to 5 times be nice to yourself somehow.
Oh, that's a nice little. Where have you picked that up from, Ollie? Is that some American podcast that you've been? Is that
no, it's like this mental health thing. I can't remember where I found it now, but it was to do with sporting mental health, and like it's so we retain to 5 times more of the negatives than the positives. So I could be like, Dave, you're a great commentator. Voice sounded awesome on that. What a great goal call that was. I love the way the intro just worked smoothly, and the out on the game was awesome. There was just that throw-in that I just thought you slipped on, and you'll go, yeah, that throw-in was rubbish, yeah, and hold on to it kind of thing. It's an interesting one.
That's a really good point. Jimmy, well, I don't know. I wasn't sure whether to put this in the pod, but I think we should do all these things. Our loyal listeners are sort of part of the Not Another Sports Pod family, Ollie. We could chuck the jingle in somewhere and let the punters decide. The guy who created it's got very thick skin, and he knows he offered a very sort of quirky, unusual jingle. I personally, I really like it, but let's let the punters decide. So maybe Ollie, you can stick it in somewhere at the end, just as the outro line, and people can listen to it a few times. It's a grower.
Yeah, and we'll put the poll in the Spotify. You can add a poll, can't you? So we'll do that. Whether we keep this or not, find out next week.